Hello.
Yeah, okay. Hi, we will begin in just a minute. I'm in the back, sorry. If you would please sign in, there is a QR code on a sheet on your tables, so please do sign in. There is an evaluation sheet as well. You'll do that at the end, but please sign in. All right, welcome to our event, Wickedness and Witchcraft, an examination of the Salem witch trials. Thank you all for coming. This should be interesting. I was about to say fun, not fun. It's not fun, but interesting. It should be interesting. My name is Sarah Reed. I'll be one of your presenters today, along with Professors Adam Guerrero, there you go, and Cindy Lewis. All right. Let's go. Oh, and we do have, in between presenters, we're going to do a little bit of trivia, some Halloween movie trivia, and these wonderful crocheted pumpkins you see up here on the stage are going to be the prizes for that trivia. So Who made the pumpkins? Samantha Elkins, who is one of my co-faculty advisors for the Needle Arts Club. So if you are interested in knitting, crocheting, or anything needle arts, we meet every Thursday from 2 to 4 p.m. in MBSS 1103. Definitely come. If you don't know how to knit or crochet, that's fine. We will teach you. So definitely come and check us out. All right, let's get started. So the first thing that I want to do is to kind of give you context for the Salem witch trials. And interestingly enough, it all begins with a silly game. In a cold Massachusetts winter in 1691, two girls, 9-year-old Betty Paris and 11-year-old Abigail Williams, who is Betty Paris's cousin, decided that they were bored. Kids get bored, right? And so they were going to go play a game. And the game that they played was putting milk into a cup and dropping an egg into it and then swirling it around. And it was supposed to show the faces of their future husbands. That was what they were supposed to see. That is not what they saw. Reportedly, what they saw, at least to them, was a coffin. And it freaked them out. And the reason it freaked them out is because these were God-fearing, religiously strict Puritans. They were not supposed to mess with anything that had anything to do with witchcraft or sorcery, hence the source of their anxiety. It didn't help that Betty Paris happened to be the daughter of a Puritan minister, Samuel Paris. So she felt like double anxiety because she was the minister's daughter and she wasn't supposed to be involved in any of this, right? But it wasn't until a few weeks later that mysterious fits begin. These girls begin to have these mysterious fits, which we don't even know today what they were. These fits rendered them at times speechless and uncommunicative, and at other times they were screaming out as if in agony. Samuel Paris, as every good father would do, consults a doctor, right? So he brings a doctor in. And the doctor he brings in is Dr. William Griggs, who comes, he examines the girls to try to figure out what's going on, realizes, in his estimation, there's nothing medically wrong with them, and so he diagnoses them instead of being, quote, under the evil hand. What he's basically saying is, this is witchcraft. This is something beyond what I can help these girls with. Here's something to keep in mind. So Puritans believed that witches existed. They believed in an active devil, beguiling unsuspecting and weak individuals, causing them to act against their brethren, threatening not only their own eternal salvation, but the very foundations of Puritan society. If then a witch existed in Salem village, terrorizing and inflicting pain on those poor girls, it was imperative in the minds of religious leaders like Paris and Reverend Cotton Mather, who we'll mention a little bit later, that they find all of those in league with the devil. Shortly thereafter, other teenage girls, began to have these same mysterious fits, including William Griggs's own servant, a girl named Betty Hubbard, and a girl named Ann Putnam, who was from a very influential Salem family. The girls, who initially had given no indication as to the cause of their suffering, began to tell the adults around them that pain was being inflicted upon them by spirits. And when pressed further, they start to name names. The first name they name is actually an enslaved woman in Samuel Paris's own household. Her name was Tituba. Some sources say Tituba was a black woman from the Caribbean, others that she was a Native American woman. Not much is known about her. Accounts of her interrogation provide spotty evidence at best, and certainly biased evidence, for her Puritan interrogators would have believed that Native Americans and black men and women were more susceptible to witchcraft and evil doings, in line with their racist 17th century colonial American beliefs. Along with Tituba, the girls also offered up the names of Sarah Osborne and Sarah Good. Sarah Good was questioned first, then Osborne, then Tituba. Good and Osborne are going to deny everything. They're going to say, what? Witchcraft? Like, we have nothing to do with witchcraft. But when Tituba was questioned, she confesses and then also says, well, not only have I been reached out to by the devil, but Good and Osborne made me do it. So one of the questions that historians have is, why? Why did she confess seemingly so easily when Good and Osborne denied it right out? So Tituba, having confessed, was spared execution, but regardless spent several months in jail and then was sold to another family, becoming lost to history. But consider her circumstances. She was enslaved, considered property without rights or agency within the Salem community. If the accused in general found themselves in a vulnerable position, then Tituba, an enslaved woman, was in an even more precarious one. By March of 1692, the girls' fits and accusations continue. They begin to accuse other women and men in the community of witchcraft, including Martha Corey and well-respected and elderly Rebecca Nurse. The other person who was arrested for a confession of witchcraft was 4-year-old Dorothy Good. She was the daughter of Sarah Good, who had been imprisoned since her accusation, and sources suggest that this 4-year-old girl just simply confessed to be with her mom. By May of 1692, 39 people had been jailed for witchcraft. All told, throughout the witchcraft hysteria in Salem, more than 200 people are going to be accused of witchcraft, although not all of them are going to be jailed, nor will they be executed. The first person to be convicted was a woman named Bridget Bishop. She was not the first to be accused, but she was the first to be convicted. One of the pieces of evidence used to convict Bishop was her seemingly contradictory testimony. During her trial, Bishop claimed, quote, "I am innocent to a witch. I know not what a witch is." One of the court judges, John Hawthorne, from the more bustling Salem town, asked Bishop, "How do you know then that you are not a witch?" Bishop was shortly thereafter found guilty and sentenced to be hanged. If the evidence used to convict Bishop proved dubious, the other kinds of evidence used in the subsequent trials were equally suspect. So one kind of evidence that they used to convict people was something called the touch test. This was based on the idea that a witch's specter, her spirit, would leave her body and go torment people, inflicting pain upon those victims. But if the witch touched the victim, the spirit would be forced back into her body and all of the pain and suffering would cease. How easy it was for the girls, once the accused touched them, to stop all of their moanings. And that was used as evidence to convict those individuals. Spectral evidence was the primary way people in Salem were accused. The accusers allowed to sit in court while the cases were being tried would mimic the movements of those on trial. If they moved their arm, then the girls would move their arm. If they crossed their legs, then the girls would cross their legs, seemingly being controlled by the quote-unquote witch on the stand. This kind of evidence, with very few exceptions, was taken as irrefutable. Another kind of evidence allowed was finding any kind of weird mark on the body. So if you had a freckle or a mole or a birthmark, because who among us doesn't have one of those, right? But if they found any kind of mark, and Keep in mind, those individuals who are accused of witchcraft and were taken into custody, one of the things that would have happened to them is that they would be strip searched because they were going to find one of these marks. So if they found one of these marks, then that was considered evidence of witchcraft as well. These kinds of evidence, if we can call it that, were supported by religious leaders in Salem, including Cotton Mather. I told you I'd come back to him, who was influential when it came to the trials and the executions of those accused. His father was a guy named Increase Mather. Now, Increase Mather was not only a Puritan minister as well, but he was also president of Harvard College. So in many ways, Cotton Mather kind of fell under the shadow, if you will, of his father for most of his life. But when it came to the Salem witch trials, Cotton was very, very influential. Cotton Mather argued that the use of spectral evidence, giving fire and brimstone sermons to encourage his congregation to commit themselves, not only to rooting out witchcraft, but also to living more pious lives. Indeed, in one of his writings, Cotton suggested that Salem's problems could be traced to the lack of piety among its residents. We wouldn't have an infestation of witches if you just lived good, godly lives, was basically his point. Cotton's position on witchcraft, and in particular the kinds of evidence that could be used to convict, was a position that even his own father began to question. Increase Mather published Cases of Conscience in 1692 during the witchcraft hysteria, in which he argued caution, saying, quote, that 10 suspected witches should escape, then that one innocent person should be condemned. Meaning, maybe we should really rethink the kind of evidence we're using to convict these people, because we may be convicting innocent people. So how did this hysteria, which seemed to grow unimpeded, end? The governor of Massachusetts, interestingly enough, William Phips, came back to Massachusetts finding that his own wife had been accused of witchcraft. And lo and behold, he decides, feeling that this might have gotten out of hand at that point, and also being somewhat influenced by Increase Mather's Cases of Conscience, that maybe he should disallow the use of spectral evidence in court. Once that happens, those convictions fall. By 1693, the trials commenced for the remaining 52 prisoners. With no spectral evidence allowed, only 49 of them were convicted, and the three who were acquitted, and the three who were convicted had themselves pardoned. The height of the witch trials was over. So, what is the importance of the witch trials? That we are still debating. Certainly the trials show us a microcosmic look at colonial Massachusetts and Puritan society with its anxieties and fears about war, fights with Native Americans, land disputes, and the like. So they had a few things on their minds, right, that might have put them on edge a little bit. But there are lessons as well when it comes to justice. There was no presumption of innocence in 1692. But that has become an important legal principle since the trials. Innocent until proven guilty. There were also debates on evidence and what should and should not be allowed into a court of law. Today, it's beyond a reasonable doubt, right? Questions have been raised as well about the significance placed on the evidence of children during the hysteria. Most of those accusers, especially early on, are going to be teenage girls. Placing an importance on children giving testimony can be somewhat problematic because, in part, children can be impressionable and easily persuaded by the fears and biases of the adults around them. I leave it to my esteemed co-presenters to talk more about the motivations behind the witch trials, but I leave you with what I consider to be one of the most important things to take from this event, namely the 20 men and women who were executed. They include Bridget Bishop, a woman in her 50s. She had been accused of witchcraft before 1692, but was acquitted. She was seen as an outsider and was considered a bit cantankerous. She had a bit of a temper, even spending some time in jail for a theft, but that is a crime that she refused to admit to. At her trial in 1692, there were several witnesses brought to testify against her, including a sailor who said she had come to his bedside in the night, hit him on the head, and then disappeared out a window. Other testimony was brought against her, causing her to show her disbelief and appeal to all in the courtroom, begging someone to speak for her. No one did. Her reputation seemed to condemn her before she ever went to trial in Salem. Sarah Good. She was a beggar with a reportedly bad temper, and to me, I think her story is one of the saddest. This was during a time when poverty was seen as a way of God showing his displeasure. That's what the Puritans believed. They didn't look upon poverty with empathy or compassion. They saw it as a punishment and ostracized those individuals. One of the pieces of evidence used to condemn Sarah Good at her trial was the fact that she didn't attend church regularly. So that was used as evidence that she was in league with the devil because she couldn't step into a church and attend church services. Someone actually asked her, why? Why don't you attend church services? And she said it's not because she didn't want to, it's because she couldn't afford appropriate clothes to wear to church. At the time of her arrest, she was pregnant. That did not save her, and neither did her own husband, by the way, who called his wife, quote, an enemy to all that is good. While in witch's jail, chained to a brick wall in a filthy cell, Sarah gave birth to her daughter, Mercy. Her other child, 4-year-old Dorothy, watched it all happen, chained to a wall within the same cell. That infant daughter died several weeks later. Her death was used as evidence against Sarah, the judges claiming that she had murdered her own child. 4-year-old Dorothy watched as her mother was led from the cell, sentenced to be hanged. 4-year-old would spend 8 months in witch's jail. When she was finally released, she never recovered, moving from house to house wherever she could find shelter, and finally disappearing from history in 1738. Rebecca Nurse. She was a well-respected member of the Salem community from a prominent family, and she was actually acquitted the first time she went to trial. But then the judge said, well, let's re-examine that evidence to see if she was really not guilty. And when they re-examined the evidence, they found a question that she had answered, and her answer to them wasn't as good as maybe it could have been. And so they bring her back on trial. And she's very flustered. Like, she thought that she had been acquitted, and now she's back on trial, so she's very emotional about that. And they ask her a question, and she literally doesn't hear it because she's hard of hearing. And so she doesn't answer. Her silence became her condemnation. She was hanged on July 19th. Her family, grieving her loss, sneaked to the gallows in the middle of the night where she still hung, cutting down her body and taking it away to bury her properly. They could not fathom the woman they so cared about being flung unceremoniously into a mass grave. Elizabeth Howe was the mother of 6 children. There were several accusations against her, and she was arrested for witchcraft. While in jail, several of her daughters and even her blind husband brought food to her, showing care and sustaining her during her confinement. Despite having witnesses for her in her defense, including Minister Samuel Phillips and her own father-in-law, who said she, quote, set aside humane infirmities as become a Christian with respect to himself as a father and dutifully, and a wife to his son, very caring, loving, obedient, and kind, considering his want of eyesight, she was found guilty and hanged. Susanna Martin. She was married to a man named George Martin, and she had 8 children with George. She had been previously accused of witchcraft, but her husband defended her and actually sued her accuser for slander, and she was acquitted. But when she was accused again in 1692, her husband had been deceased for several years, and she had no defender. At her trial, she recited parts of the Bible perfectly. It was said that a witch could not do this, for they would stumble over the holy words. However, Cotton Mather explained away her recitations, saying, "Those working for the devil can be very good actors." She was found guilty and executed in July. Sarah Wilds. Oh, in a society intent on conformity, Sarah was a wild card, as all good Sarahs are. She was previously charged with fornication and later with wearing a silk scarf, which was scandalous. What probably influenced the accusations against her, however, was the family feud between her family and the family of her husband's late wife, the Goulds, who happened to be related to the Putnams, some of the principal accusers. Reverend George Burroughs was the only Puritan minister to be executed for witchcraft. Before his execution, he recited the Lord's Prayer, but again, devil can be a good actor, right? Interestingly, some of his accusers just happened to be those within Salem to whom he was indebted. Joke's on them. What's he going to do after he's dead? Pay you back? Right? George Jacob Sr., he was an elderly man, nearly 90 years old. He was accused of witchcraft by his granddaughter, probably in an attempt to save her own life. Martha Carrier was from Andover, Massachusetts. She was accused by Ann Putnam and a group of her Putnam's friends. Martha saw the girls and claimed, "Oh, those girls must be sick in the head." That was enough to arrest her for alleged witchcraft. Martha had 4 children, and not only was she taken into custody, but so were her children. She had 2 teenage sons, and to secure a confession of witchcraft from them and also confessions of witchcraft against their own mother, those 2 boys were tortured. Carrier's younger children followed, perhaps persuaded by the methods employed on their older brothers. John Proctor, both he and his wife Elizabeth stood accused of witchcraft. Elizabeth Proctor was found guilty along with her husband, but was not executed because she was pregnant at the time. And by the time she gave birth, the witchcraft hysteria was over. Their son, too, was tortured to secure his accusation of witchcraft against his parents. John Willard is interesting because he was the constable whose job it was to bring the accused to court. But at some point, he begins to question the validity of those accusations and just simply refuses to do it. And lo and behold, he gets accused of witchcraft and is found guilty and executed. Martha Corey, originally accused by Ann Putnam, Martha Corey was not immediately arrested because she was a fine, upstanding, church-going member of the Puritan community. But Abigail Williams and Ann Putnam persisted, saying that they were sure it was Martha Corey's specter who was tormenting them. Martha was arrested and actually laughed in the court at the girls' theatrics. She was found guilty and executed in September. Mary Easty was Rebecca Nurse's sister, and again considered a fine, upstanding church member. In fact, when she was questioned in court, judges asked her accusers if they were sure it was Easty who was their tormentor, not finding much to condemn her. She was released from prison on May 18th, but then rearrested on May 20th after more accusations come in about her. She was eventually executed. Her last appeal to the court is poignant. She said, quote, "I petition your honors not for my own life, for I know I must die and my appointed time is set. But the Lord, he knows it is that no more innocent blood be shed. The Lord above, that is the searcher of all hearts, knows that as I shall answer at the tribunal seat, I never knew the least thing of witchcraft." Mary Parker was a 55-year-old widow whose family, after her execution, just like Rebecca Nurse, gathered her body and buried her on their own property. Alice Parker was accused of multiple crimes, including murder. During her trial, she begged for mercy, but was found guilty and executed. Ann Putiator was a wealthy woman in her 70s. Her son Thomas desperately tried to save his mother at her trial, but to no avail, and she was executed. Wilmot Red, she was married to a fisherman known for her short temper. When asked about her accusers, she stated simply, quote, "My opinion is that they are in a sad condition." She was executed in September. Margaret Scott, similar to Sarah Good, was an impoverished beggar, placing her under suspicion within her community. Samuel Wardell Sr. was a farmer, handyman, and family man who had an interest in folk magic, making him vulnerable. They were both executed in September. And finally, Giles Corey. He was the 80-year-old husband of Martha Corey, and he refused to testify against his wife. His interrogators tortured him to try to get him to say that she was indeed a witch, and he simply refused to do it. So they decided to lay him down on his stomach, place a board on his back, and begin to place heavy rocks on that board, pressing him until he confessed. And still he refused to do it. He was pressed to death. Interestingly, he was defiant to the end. When court officials went to go confiscate his property, because if you were found guilty and executed of witchcraft, the officials could go and take your property. So when they went to go take his property, confiscate his property, they found that before his arrest, he had actually transferred all of his property to his sons-in-law, meaning they couldn't touch it. These were individuals who lost their lives in the midst of fear, panic, and injustice. They were people who had family and friends who cared about them and who were devastated to see them killed. In my mind, that is one of the most important lessons from the Salem witch trials. All right, so like I said, in between speakers, we're going to do some trivia. Let me get down off the stage. Okay, so movie trivia. I did not bring my glasses. That was silly of me. All right. Oh, this one's a good one. In the movie Hocus Pocus, what are the names of the three Sanderson sisters? Yes. You got it. Perfect. Yeah, just pick one. Awesome. All right. Let's do a couple more. Which ghost is known as the friendly ghost? Casper, you got it. Casper the Friendly Ghost. Very good. All right. Oh, this one's one of my favorite movies. I love this movie. In the original 1984 Ghostbusters, what giant creature attacks New York City? Yes. Yeah, in the blue, yeah. Oh, no, not the Pillsbury Doughboy. So close. Next to him. Stay Puffed Marshmallow Man. You got it. Awesome. All right, so I'm going to hand over the presentation to our next presenter, Adam Guerrero, who's going to talk about some of the motivations behind the witch trials.
He's controlling that. Of course, those that know me know that I love culture and I love talking about the everyday people. So that was a wonderful presentation because it's very touching. Although Professor Lewis was saying or Professor Shelton was saying the whole time, that sounds reasonably good verdict and good sentencing. That's good law. I don't know what you're talking about. It's like it was weird. Okay, so I want to step out. I'm going to zoom out a little bit, and we're going to be talking about witchcraft as a whole and kind of look at it as a phenomenon, right? Now, one thing I do want you to keep in mind is that what's going on in Salem, they're not the same peoples, right? With the different parts of Europe and other places, they're not the same, so I want to go in before I start giving all this. Be keeping that in the back of our mind, but we're looking at similarities and patterns, right? So today, I'd like to explore one of the most haunting episodes in early modern history. Again, the rise and transformation of witchcraft belief across the Atlantic world. This is not just a story about superstition or trials. It's about how fears become law, okay? And how belief becomes a tool of power. So, for instance, if you read historian Brian Levick in The Witch Hunt in Early Modern Europe, he reminds us that, quote, the witch hunts were not simply an outburst of irrationality, but the product of deeply rooted fears about order, gender, and the supernatural. Between the 15th and 18th centuries, over 40,000 Europeans, mostly women, were executed as witches. And when Europeans colonized the Americas, they carried the mental framework with them, blending it with new anxieties about empire, race, and the unknown, as was mentioned earlier. So today we'll trace 5 key stages. Okay? 1, we're going to look at the theological roots of witchcraft. Okay? The second, we're going to look at Heinrich Kramer's ideology and the Malleus Maleficarum. We'll also look at, number 3, the European persecutions of the 16th and 17th centuries, which definitely dates at this time with the Salem witch trials. And then we'll also look at the Atlantic world, so look specifically at the Salem witch trials, and also I want to try to tie in a little bit and see if we can find some common theme with Spanish colonial inquisitions. And then finally, just kind of look at the decline and how this eventually transformed witchcraft into modern thought. Next slide, please. So to look at the theological roots, we have to look at early Christianity. And in early Christianity, magic was not yet a capital crime. It was just simply false belief. So in the City of God, St. Augustine wrote, "The demons are not gods, but unclean spirits who seek to ensnare mankind through false wonders." To Augustine, the danger lay in deception, mistaking demonic illusion for divine truth. So by the 13th century, Thomas Aquinas, as you see pictured here, gave this idea legal and moral teeth, right? In the Summa Theologia, which is what he's most known for, to attribute, quote, to a creature what belongs to God alone is superstition. Basically, he's transforming his logic, transforming magic into heresy. If someone wielded supernatural power, it could only come from the devil. From then on, witchcraft wasn't just ignorance. It was a rebellion against divine authority. So this fusion of theology and this fear became the intellectual blueprint, if you will, in which witch hunting would take root. Okay? Next slide, please. So in comes Heinrich Kramer. So in the 1470s, you have a Dominican inquisitor named Heinrich Kramer who was sent to Innsbruck, Austria by Rome to investigate reports of witchcraft. He fixated specifically, if you look at the cases, he fixated on women's sexuality, interrogating suspects about intercourse with demons, and eventually it got weird. Bishop George Gulser, the bishop dismisses this and basically says, look, you're going to be bringing scandal upon the church. You're weird. What are you doing? And again, what should have been his obscure, I got humiliated, I need to disappear, only turned into a bigger obsession. He's like, no, I'm right. I'm going to go ahead and continue. So he retreats back to Germany and immediately starts putting all of his efforts into this one book, the Malleus Maleficarum, or also known as the Hammer of Witches. This was published in 1486. Now, the Malleus has 3 parts. One is a theological justification for the belief in witches, what we just kind of spoke about. 2, you have a detailed description of witch practices. So, for instance, how do they operate? Weather magic, flight, sexual pacts, you name it. It's all sorts of interesting stuff. And then number 3, you have a legal guide to interrogation, torture, and execution. I saw Professor Shelton perk up to that like, ooh, I want to read that now. At its heart was this one single premise, this one idea, that women's weakness in sexuality made them natural servants of Satan. He said that, not me. Kramer wrote, quote, all witchcraft comes from carnal lust, which is in women insatiable. I know, you can start hating them now. Historian Hans-Peter Brodel observes that the Malleus combined theology, folklore, and inquisitorial procedure, which is what makes it unique, right? And it brings it into a closed system of thought from which no accused woman logically could escape. You heard that earlier, for instance. The whole, the way you answered that was just, or how do you know? Or, oh, hey, a witch, obviously if you're in league with the devil, you could be a good actor, right? So even though the University of Cologne, which was very popular then, condemned this, nobody accepted this. The church didn't accept this. The universities at this time, they didn't accept it. But even though it was condemned, and the printing press made this into a bestseller. Who doesn't want to read this? By the way, I'm going to call the person out. I love that you're wearing a Ghostbuster outfit. That's awesome. Who are you going to call? So again, and what this does is it creates the archetype of the witch as female, sexual, and subversive, right? And this is something that will haunt Europe for centuries. Next slide, please. So let's look at the great European witch hunts. So by the mid-1500s, the Reformation had happened, right? And this fractures Christendom. And so think of it as both sides are basically trying to rally their troops together. What do we believe? Redefine things. And it's not just that. You have war, you have famine, you have plague. All of these fuel a desperate search. Who's to blame? Right? So in the Constitutio Criminalis Carolina, which was written in 1532, this legalizes torture and immediately transforms suspicion into confession. Because, well, who's not going to confess? You're being tortured because they want that answer, right? And then eventually that confession is like, oh, well, you confess, now we could just kill you. Which we obviously cannot do today. I've learned that from this guy. Thank you for telling us that. Which amendment? I'm teasing. I'm not going to make y'all answer that in front of your government professors. The French jurist, Jean Bodin, he declared On the Demon Mania of Witches in 1580, it is not possible that a republic can exist where such abominations are permitted. So for him, this witch hunting, it was a civic duty, right? It's a defense of both God and the king. It is not just the church going after them. It is everybody's duty to do so. So between 1626 and 1631, the prince and the bishoprics of Würzburg and Bamberg, they executed over 1,000 people Entire families perished because of this. One condemned mayor, Johannes Junius, I know that one of our German experts here is like, what are you saying? Stop that. They secretly wrote from his cell, he said, I must die innocent. If I confess, I am killed. If I deny, I am killed. God pity my soul. Historian H.C. Eric Middleford called it, it's self-propelling machinery. Fear justified procedure, and procedure generated fear. So meanwhile, in 1589, King James VI of Scotland, okay, also King James I of England, he's in the process of sailing to Denmark to marry the Princess Anne. And, well, a storm nearly sank his ship, which, if you live in that area, I see one former resident, or if you ever travel there, you know those are rough seas. But Danish officials blamed witches for this. And James was like, yeah, that makes sense. So he personally, the king, supervised the North Berwick trials where women confessed to conjuring storms. He then wrote his very famous text, and if you don't mind going over to the next slide for me, please. You have here the demonology, right? And in this, the devil, he says, the devil teacheth them to make pictures of wax for destroying men. One historian stated, the Scottish witch was not a healer turned malefactor, but a sinner whose confession confirmed a national theology. So in both Germany, what we see here is in both Germany and Scotland, witchcraft was used to reimpose divine order during what we see as political crises, right? So it's not just the church getting involved, it's the state as well. If you don't mind going to the next slide. So what about the Atlantic? How does this come about? Transatlantic history, right? So when Europeans colonized the Americas, they also are going to be carrying this moral framework across the ocean, as was kind of pointed out with Puritans. Witchcraft belief became a means of defining purity, order, and belonging in a fragile colonial society. Historian James Sharp writes, the colonists carried not only English law, but the mental universe that sustained it. The Puritan colonies, they were built on this idea of covenant theology, the belief that the entire community prospered or suffered together under God's scrutiny. So if you think about looking at, say, for instance, John Winthrop, right? The Sermon on the Mount. We must prosper or God will withdraw his preset help. So by the 1690s, that covenant seemed to be crumbling. And not to mention, you see the frontier constantly raging, wars are raging with native peoples. You have famine and crop failures. Economic tensions are causing towns to split apart like Salem. When several young girls began to convulse and claim that invisible specters tormented them, ministers saw not illness but spiritual contagion. The accused, including Sarah Good, as Professor Reed talked about, a beggar, Sarah Osborne, an independent woman who had defied property norms, and Tituba, an enslaved woman who's might be of indigenous or African descent, right? Under pressure, Tituba, as was pointed out, described the devil's book and animal familiars, right? The devil came to me and bid me serve him. Now I know that was questionable, right? As was brought up. It's like, well, who wouldn't confess? You're being threatened with torture, and especially being a woman who is enslaved, it makes sense, right? So her confession immediately sets off this frenzy, and within months, over 150 people were imprisoned. As we talked about, Giles Corey, he refused to plead and was pressed to death beneath heavy stones. His last words, as was immortalized, more weight. Although he is one who also kind of brought his wife to attention in the first place, which, but he refused to testify later. One historian argued, Salem was not an isolated event, but the culmination of anxieties born of war, gender, conflict, and frontier insecurity. The courtroom itself became a theater of panic, which I know Professor Shelton thought that this was all good stuff. He's actually going to start using spectral evidence in some of his cases. But again, this idea of spectral evidence, right? So visions, dreams, right? Just this acting on the stage. It was all accepted as proof. So when Reverend George Burroughs, who was a former minister, recited the Lord's Prayer perfectly, as pointed out, in his execution, the crowd still hanged him, even though he did it perfectly. In 1693, Governor William Phipps halted the proceedings and declared a fast day of repentance. Okay? Next slide, please. Thank you. Meanwhile, in New Spain, where you have Peru and Brazil, colonial authorities equated indigenous and African spiritual practices with diabolism, right? So it's not, again, like I said before, this is going to be a little different, but let's see if we can see some common themes. So for instance, women healers called brujas, curanderas, right? Hechicheras, right? Because they became special targets. They practiced herbal medicine. They used Catholic prayers and African rituals. So one 1650 case from Mexico City records the trial of Maria de los Angeles, an indigenous midwife accused of, quote, diabolical healing. Her supposed crimes included using herbs, river stones, and whispered prayers to cure illness. Villagers testified that she saved lives. Inquisitors claimed she made a pact with the devil. One historian notes, the Inquisition in Brazil sought not the European witch, but the mestizo healer whose power lay between worlds. These women operated in the borderlands of the empire, between European and indigenous male and female, orthodoxy and survival. Their persecution reveals how witchcraft in the colonies functioned as a form of imperial control, a way to discipline bodies, discipline people's beliefs, discipline specific racial groups that they are now classifying to fit neatly within this Christian hierarchy. Next slide, please. Or actually, go back, sorry, one more time. Those separated by geography and empire, this is hard whenever I don't have a clicker. Though separated by geography and empire, Salem and the Spanish colonies do share a common thread. Both of them weaponized witchcraft to police the boundaries of their community. In Salem, the threat was internal, so you have, as we mentioned, rebellious women. You have spiritual dissenters, or people who just didn't want to go with the grain of Puritan society. And you have social outsiders, the outcasts, destabilizing a fragile theocracy, or when the religion is dominating the politics. In New Spain and Brazil, the threat was external. Indigenous and African women whose healing challenged colonial control. So in both of these cases, witchcraft accusations became tools to reassert moral and political order during crisis. Whether Puritan magistrates or Spanish inquisitors, both claimed to defend the faith, but in practice they defended their power. Next slide, please. So why does it start to disappear? So by 1700, the great witch hunts pretty much ended. Legal reform demanded evidence. Oh, that's silly evidence. That's, these lawyers talk about. And also enlightened ideas. Enlightened thinkers began to view the universe as rational and law-bound. Yet, as one historian states, the witch hunts were not madness, but meaning. It's a desperate logic seeking to impose moral order on a changing world. So the witch survived. They transformed from a demon servant into a cultural symbol. One historian writes, the witch endured not a relic of fear, but as a vessel of imagination, carrying humanity's oldest anxieties about power and the unknown. From the stake to Hollywood today, the witch now, to us, embodies both persecution and empowerment, the ultimate survival of fear. If you ever go to Salem today, I wonder how they would feel about them taking their traumas, and now it's just entertainment. Next slide, please. So again, from Innsbruck to Salem to Mexico City, to which the witch's story is the story of power, of how belief can really sanctify violence, and how societies under stress turn difference into danger. So in Heinrich Kramer's humiliation that he went through in Austria, this births a manual that justified centuries of killing. King James, a monarch, his fear at sea transformed superstition into a royal decree persecuting these individuals. In Salem, panic replayed both as Puritans sought purity through accusation. And in the Spanish colonies, inquisitors cloaked racial and gender hierarchy in the language of salvation. So across the Atlantic world, witchcraft served as a mirror, reflecting what societies most feared about themselves. You see women's power being challenged here, cultural hybridness or cultural diffusion, and the collapse of certainty. As one historian said, the more witches are executed, the more are discovered. When fear becomes justice, there is no end to the hunt.
Thank you, Professor Guerrero. That was fascinating, a look at the historical sort of underpinnings, if you will, of witch trials. All right, couple of more trivia questions, and then we'll get to Professor Lewis. My next one is about one of my favorite childhood Halloween movies. And it's The Great Pumpkin, Charlie Brown. Who waits for the Great Pumpkin? Yes. Linus. Yes, it is Linus in his blue blanket. I love it. All right, one more, and then we'll save the rest for the end of the event. Let's see. What horror movie features a haunted hotel called The Overlook? Oh my goodness. Oh, I don't know who raised their hand first. Okay. The Shining, yes, it is indeed. The Shining.
That last table was first. Yeah.
Oh, well.
That's, yeah, I am sure. I would look. What do we do? Arm wrestle?
Yeah, no.
It's fine. Don't worry about it.
Matina said no. Okay, thank you. All right, excellent, excellent. We've got some movie buffs in here. I like it. All right, so our next presenter is Cindy Lewis. She's going to tell us all about horror genre as it relates to colonial America.
All right, can I set it here and you hear me okay? Can everybody hear me okay? All right, we got all that nerdy stuff out of the way. Blah, blah, blah. I'm just kidding. All that's fascinating, and you both did great. Now that you've learned some of the context and the characters of the Salem witch trials, I want to talk to you about some of the more well-known paranormal stories to come out of the Salem witch trials. So first, though, let's talk about a ghost story. We know that ghost stories exist to give us a good spook, and so they're fun, right? Everybody likes to be spooked a little bit, but there's a little bit more to that. Is there a purpose beyond that to ghost stories, would you say? Yeah? Well, ghost stories we see can provide a window into the past, right? They can offer insights into cultural beliefs about life and death and the afterlife. Many ghost stories can act as morality plays, where they teach us lessons about right and wrong, good versus evil. Ghost stories can show a clash or a blending of cultures. They can be a vital source of history for groups of people traditionally left out of the narrative. So for women, laborers, immigrants, people of color. Ghost stories can be useful ways of telling their stories. Ghost stories can also provide a way to explore and process trauma, whether it's a nation's collective guilt or personal experience. Ghosts often appear after major traumatic events, making them a tool for dealing with history's darker moments. So there's a larger purpose to ghost stories, and it's kind of human nature for us to use them to maybe explain things or process things, right? With that being said, it's not really surprising that an event as tragic as the Salem witch trials has spurred countless ghost stories. So let's get into them. We're going to start with the witch house. The witch house was built in 1675. It is the only remaining structure tied to the Salem witch trials. In 1692, the house was owned by Judge Jonathan Corwin, one of the magistrates who presided over the hearings and the trials that sentenced many of these innocent people to death. Many of the preliminary hearings actually took place inside this home, and locals have reported a whole slew of strange phenomena, such as flickering basement lights, engines stalling nearby, shapes in the windows, whispers down hallways, the smell of smoke sometimes, the smell of roses at other times, and sometimes a woman's voice can be heard singing in certain hours of the night. So lots of reported activity here, and kind of not surprising, I guess. If anywhere is going to be haunted, it's probably going to be one of these places. All right, next slide. This is Gallows Hill, also known as Proctor's Ledge. It is located on the edge of town. This is the site where the 19 people were hanged as part of their witch trials after being found guilty of being witches. Now, visitors here report, again, a whole slew of paranormal activity, strange sounds, full-bodied apparitions of people that are translucent, disembodied voices, cold spots, in some places feeling the ground shake. Right, so lots of activity reported here as well. Next slide. Howard Street Cemetery is located near the old Salem jail in downtown Salem. It was here that on September 19th, 1692, Giles Corey was executed following his refusal to plead guilty to charges of witchcraft. As you've heard, Corey's execution was particularly brutal. Rather than being hanged, he was slowly and agonizingly crushed to death over a period of several days. He was then buried in an unmarked grave nearby. It is said that Corey haunts the vicinity and is most commonly encountered before or after a town tragedy, such as the Great Salem Fire of 1914. It's reported that right before the fire, a ghostly figure that appeared to look like Corey was seen hovering over the cemetery grounds. The fire ends up starting near Gallows Hill, the site of his wife Martha's hanging, and ends up destroying most of Salem. So it's rumored that his vengeful spirit caused this fire. So, next slide. Next is the Joshua Ward House. This is located at 148 Washington Street in Salem. It was built on the former site of Sheriff George Corwin's house. Corwin was the high sheriff, or one of the high sheriffs, during the Salem witch trials. And he's reportedly buried in the basement of the original house. And he was allegedly buried there because some of the survivors of the accused during the witch trials were planning to steal his body after his untimely death and ransom it for money. You know, you got to get your hustle on. You can't knock the hustle. Some people believe that Corwin's home was also a torture chamber, that it had secret rooms and secret compartments where he or others would torture those accused of witchcraft or his political enemies, etc. It's rumored that he haunts this place, that it is also haunted by the violent spirits of those who suffered in that location. There are reports of cold spots, people experiencing scratches in weird places on their bodies, and then the appearance of a lady in black that likes to show up and screech in your face. So she sounds like someone that's really cool to hang out with. She just pops up out of nowhere, screams in your face, and then leaves. We all have days like that. So I can't really judge her. Next, please. The Old Witch Jail. This is located on the corner of Prison Lane and County Street. It was in the dungeon of the Old Witch Jail that the accused were held during their trials and before execution. Now, the conditions in here were obviously not, the Ritz-Carlton. They were appalling, to say the least. It was dirt-floored, lice-ridden, dark, dismal, stank of tobacco and feces and all kinds of other human fluids. It was hot in the summer, extremely cold in the winter. Iron bars covered the windows in an effort to prevent the specters that resided allegedly in those that were accused from fleeing the dwelling. The jail keepers used shackles to hold the condemned in place. It was believed that it would hold not only the person, but the demon or the specter, whatever that lived inside, in place as well. And this included the young, the old, the ill. Everyone was chained in order to prevent them or their demon possession from leaving the prison. Now, once a person was convicted of witchcraft, it was usually only a matter of days before they were executed. So we have some real solid due process going on during the witch trials. Sheriff George Corwin would collect the condemned at the jail. They would be taken by cart with mounted guards alongside to the execution site at the edge of town, which was Gallows Hill, as we discussed. It was in Salem jail where Martha Corey was excommunicated before her hanging on September 22nd. It was also from here that Giles Corey was taken to an open field and crushed to death. The 17-year-old daughter of George Jacobs, who had implicated her own grandfather, wrote a letter asking for his forgiveness as he awaited execution in Salem jail. Margaret Jacobs had been accused herself and in fear had confessed to witchcraft and accused several others, including her grandfather. It was also here that Mary Warren, the servant of John and Elizabeth Proctor, was examined by magistrates, and the Reverends Warren had claimed to be afflicted, accusing her employers. When she recanted, she too was accused of witchcraft. So there's a lot of activity in terms of the investigation and the accusations, etc. So locals have reported that lights flicker even after the prison was no longer hooked up to the electrical circuit. Eerie screams have been heard at all hours of the day. And for those brave enough to step inside, it is commonly reported that dark shadow people lurk the halls and walk through walls and will sometimes touch you. So again, sounds like a party, right? Next slide, please. All right, Old Burying Point, or Old Burial Point. This is also known as the Charter Street Cemetery. It is the oldest maintained cemetery in Salem, one of the oldest in the United States. Judge John Hawthorne, who was one of the leading witchcraft trial judges, is buried here. So it's reported that this is one of the most haunted places in the city of Salem. Visitors report all sorts of paranormal activity, including the sighting of Judge Hawthorne himself. He shows up and hangs out. There's also rumors of a lady in white that appear. This one's not reported to scream in your face, so I don't know if maybe she's in a better mood. She's on, antidepressants or something like that. There's also reports of a woman and a child that wear Victorian-era blue dresses, along with unexplained phenomena like, again, cold spots, voices, orbs. There's also rumors of a shadowy figure that will rise from the ground in front of gravestones and attempt to reach out and touch people. So, great times to be had in Salem. Next slide. All right, so in conclusion, are any of these ghost stories true? Who knows, right? Can we prove it, whether or not they're true? Can we prove that ghosts exist? But the reality of the matter is, whether or not there are ghosts that haunt the streets of Salem, there's plenty of reason to be terrified of events like the Salem witch trials. Right? When we reduce this event to its very core, what we have is a group of 25 innocent, in terms of committing a crime, innocent people, 19 hanged, 1 crushed, and 5 that died due to conditions in the jail, but 25 people that are executed at the hands of their own government with no due process in the absence of any real crime, right? And so that, I think, in itself is probably scarier than any ghost story we could probably come up with to deal with the trauma of something like that. So it's up to you to decide what's true, what's not, but there's a purpose to all of these ghost stories, right? All right, that's it for me. I hope you're scared. Have nightmares. Just kidding, don't have nightmares.
All right, thank you, Professor Lewis. Our last 3 trivia questions, with the grand prize being, of course, the Great Pumpkin. The Great Pumpkin. Okay, so the next one is, about another one of my favorite movies. Gosh, these are great movies. What item does E.T. famously wear on Halloween night? A sheet, a blanket. Yeah, we'll go with that. Perfect. Thank you.
Well, what's his favorite candy? Follow up.
Oh, yeah, what's his favorite candy? Reese's Pieces. Yeah, you don't get a pumpkin. Sorry about that. All right. What movie features the line, "Whatever you do, don't fall asleep"? Nightmare on Elm Street. Yeah, you got it. That scared the stuffing out of me. It was not a movie that I ever watch. And finally, another great movie. In Beetlejuice.
You said it once.
That's the question. How many times must you say his name to summon him? Yes. 3 times. Yes, you've got it. All right. Thank you all for coming. I hope you had an interesting time. If you would, please, if you didn't sign in, please do so before you leave. Also, please click on the QR code, fill out that evaluation. We do absolutely look at those. Take some candy. Have a wonderful rest of your day. Thank you.